Hello, everyone. My name is Lorna McCafferty. The MassCann Virtual Education Village is produced and broadcast thanks to the all-volunteer effort of the MassCann organization, the Massachusetts Cannabis Reform Coalition. MassCann is a registered 501c4 nonprofit dedicated to educating lawmakers, regulators, and the general public about the harms caused by a decades-long racist drug war. To find out more and become a member, please visit masscann.org and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/masscann and on Instagram at masscann.org. Today we are here with our 21st Virtual Education Village panel. The Virtual Education Village has become an integral component of MassCann's educational mission in the time of the coronavirus. Today's panel will cover hemp cultivation, CBG, Delta-8, CBN, and CBD, and so much more. With me today to discuss those topics is John Nathan from Bay State Hemp Company. John is the founder and president of Bay State Hemp Company, a Massachusetts-based extraction and processing facility with a focus on isolation and isomerization of minor cannabinoids from industrial hemp. On behalf of the MassCann board and the organization, we are pleased to welcome you to the 21st Virtual Education Village. Good afternoon, John. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, first and foremost, I want to thank you, Lorna, for reaching out to me, and I want to thank MassCann as an organization in general for existing and for doing the work that allows folks like me to be able to walk into this industry and bring my own thoughts and ideas. If it wasn't for the people who came before me, this wouldn't be possible. So thank you to you and to the organization, and I truly appreciate it. You know, I always preface when people ask, you know, a little bit about myself. There's quite a bit there, but I'll talk about what's truly relevant to both myself, my place in this industry, and the mission statement of our company. So I'm a Massachusetts marijuana patient. I started using marijuana medicinally in 2016. I was dealing with crippling anxiety, insomnia, as well as a slew of other characterizing symptoms due to, you know, various mental illnesses and issues that, you know, I deal with. So it was through that pathway that I was able to find out that what had worked best for me was not THC. And I'm not saying that as a general critique on THC, but we all have our own endocannabinoid systems. Our bodies respond to different molecules differently. I am a huge fan of THC. I enjoy it and all of its properties, but the medicinal benefits that I required were better found in other cannabinoids, including both on their own and as well as in combination with THC. And that had led me down a path of exploration. When I first started using cannabis medicinally, there was an overwhelming amount of paranoia that I had dealt with, and it wasn't a factor of the THC. It was things that I had to deal with in my life. But at the time, I was trying to treat insomnia, so it was the incorporation of minor cannabinoids like CBN and CBD and as well as various terpenes and the science behind that, including but not limited to like beta-caryophyllene and linalool, and finding all of these other constituents and components of the plant that were beneficial to me, and then the struggle of trying to source them through the Massachusetts medical marijuana market. I was waking up almost every other day and looking to see who had some CBN products in stock, and calling dispensaries and driving hours to find where I could find it. And I was able to find a dispensary that was making capsules of it, and it was changing my life. You know, I say that cannabis had saved my life. It's a bit cliche, but it truly did at that time, and still continues to. And I couldn't find what I medicinally needed at a medical dispensary. So I started sourcing through all throughout the country for CBN tablets. And then it was over some time that the 2018 Agricultural Improvement Act was passed, legalizing CBD. And I had been thumbing through, the mechanics and the chemistry of how CBN is created, both naturally and synthetically. And I realized that there was a gap here. So I had set out and I decided that, no medical patient or consumer should be put in a position where they have to start a company to fill a gap for what helps them. So we're here to proliferate these molecules and these cannabinoids through as many avenues as possible so that other people can find out about whole plant medicine and how to best treat the ailments that they're seeking to treat. Did it cut out? She was having internet issues prior. Okay, I could do that. I'm from Jersey, so I'm really good at just talking and rambling. I think she's back. But
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I could hear you now. Okay,
I was
cool.
asking about CBG.
Oh, okay, cool. So yes, so CBG. CBG has kind of found its way into the limelight and into everyday nomenclature due to the hemp industry. And one of the issues that a lot of us deal with on the hemp side of things is curbing and maintaining those THC levels. For anyone listening that is unaware, the hemp industry, we are constrained to a 0.3% total THC limit, which means the total amount of THCA plus delta 9 THC times 0.877 equals your total THC, and that percentage must maintain below 0.3%. So it's very difficult to grow a CBD hemp crop and mitigate that THC growth. Essentially, if you do too good of a job, you will naturally grow more THC than what is allowed currently federally and by state. So CBG, I'm talking about the CBG crop, not the molecule, but CBG kind of found its way into the limelight because hemp cultivars had found that if they breed it to produce less of the CBD and more of the CBG, you can have a truly total THC compliant no matter how well you grow it. And CBG, that's kind of where it got its start, but there's been an influx of smokable CBG flower, lots of CBG biomass. So there's lots of CBG molecules floating around in the hemp space. And while right now you'll probably see a huge influx of it towards the middle of this year because a lot of farmers are switching over so that they don't grow hot. But the benefits of CBG, and what's interesting is cannabigerol is the mother of all cannabinoids. It's the first cannabinoid that is formed inside of the plant. And from there, its interaction with different enzymes and other characteristics of the plant cause it to synthesize into other various cannabinoids. A lot of times I describe the effects for me from utilizing a high CBG product is that it feels like a big breath of oxygen on a nice day. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's not very psychoactive. It's definitely a bit stimulating, but it's more so, it's really hard to explain. It's just one of those feelings. It just gives you a great sense of well-being. Other people have experienced different effects. A lot of those are subjective, and part of the problem is we can't really talk publicly in the commission of selling our products what they do. So I don't really have a pre-cut marketing spiel for how these products work, because we're not really allowed to talk about it. So it's a lot of inference and a lot of light suggestions. So usually I try to tell people, if you're looking on the hemp side and you're looking for something, and this goes against what I believe in, but sativa-like, high CBG flower would be non-psychoactive. It's less, you won't find yourself getting as tired from it. There's way less THC in it. Most of the time, I've seen some super bougie boutique CBG indoor flower that was, grown fully organic, and it still hits around like 0.2% THC. So it remains compliant. Throughout this year, actually, last year for the 2020 growing season, I was importing CBG genetics from Oregon on the West Coast and distributing them out to farmers here, so that farmers had seed that would be compliant, and then knowing that I had a use for it afterwards. So CBG has been a godsend for hemp growers, but at the same time, we do need to severely revamp the federal and the state laws so that we have a plentiful supply of CBD growing as well.
Could you please explain what CBN is? You were talking quite a bit about CBN.
Yes. So CBN, cannabinol, my all-time favorite cannabinoid. And, I try not to hype it too much, because people, a lot of times the new and hot thing in cannabis is something that shifts your thinking a bit, or opens your mind. But with CBN, it was really just the ailments that it helped me with was exactly what I was looking for. All right, so CBN is an interesting cannabinoid. And one thing to note, in the cannabis plant, traditionally less than 1% of its cannabinoid profile are these ultra rare minors. Now in hemp, that's why we're seeing a plethora of new cannabinoids growing. In fact, you're going to see a lot of THCV hemp coming out, CBDV, cannabidivarin. There's going to be a lot of CBCA, cannabichromine, the acidic molecule of it. But with CBN, it's not really a naturally occurring cannabinoid in the sense that it's synthesized inside the plant. It's a degradation cannabinoid. It's a result of THC beginning to degrade. So one of the things I used to do prior to learning how to synthesize CBN and make it plentiful was I used to take my home grows, and a lot of times, and I'm not a good grower, so cultivation is not where I'm at. I have a black thumb. I will kill everything. But a lot of times what they tell you is to examine the trichomes, to take a look at the pistils, I think they're called. I'm not, like I said, I'm not a cultivation guy, but inside those trichomes is technically where you'll start to see during your flowering phase when the plant is ready and mature. And they tell you to watch the color of the trichomes. When they're clear, it's just starting to develop. You want to get them when they're milky and they have kind of like this off-white. And then if they start to turn brown, you're told, okay, it's the THC is degrading. I used to let it turn brown because what that meant was the production naturally biosynthetic CBN, cannabinol. And that was originally how I would source it and use it. For me, CBN is it is an analyte of THC. It's molecularly different than any other cannabinoid, but it is for me the ultimate anti-anxiety and sleep cannabinoid. There is, and I'm going to be very, very careful because I was talking with you prior to this starting about how I try to stick to the facts and not the bro science. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence about what these cannabinoids can do. And there's a lot of that evidence that I have personal firsthand experience with. and I can attest that it works, but it's not something that I'm going to put out into the atmosphere just yet, which is why we all need to collectively be working on getting university research programs for cannabis funded and operational, so that we could start getting some peer-reviewed science that we can hang our hats on about how these molecules interact with the body. But I will say this, and I say this with that extreme disclaimer, but for me personally, the feelings that I got from roughly 5 to 10 milligrams of CBN reminded me of a light Valium dose. I remember sitting on my bed the first time I took CBN to try it, and I didn't know what I was feeling. It was a very foreign feeling inside my head. And in retrospect, I realized it was the first time that I sat without anxiety. I didn't have buzzing in my head. Nothing was going a million miles per hour. I wasn't tripping over my words and my thoughts. And it was a very foreign feeling to me. And I'm not going to say that that's what anybody else will feel. But for me, that was the profound incident that led me to become a disciple of CBN. We synthesize it from CBD. There's various ways that folks can go about it. A lot of people use chemical catalysts. We do it through UV light and oxygen. So we try to do it as natural in as much of a biosynthetic way as possible. The best part about working with CBN is it's a super stable molecule. If you look at a good 99% pure CBD isolate, you'll have a translucent lattice and what will appear like a powder. With CBN, its distillate in itself is extremely stable. It's almost like you can knock on it. It feels like plastic. So it's very easy to work with. It's very good with remaining suspended into products. It doesn't really deal with degradation issues as well. So it's not as sensitive to the light and to heat. We often have it running at over 250 degrees to get CBN distillate viscous. So it's without saying too much, there's also amazing anti-inflammatory properties as well. I used to always say that I believe that CBN does what a lot of people want CBD to do. And I don't say that to disparage CBD, but it's more so along the lines that combination, like 100 to 150 milligrams of CBD isolate combined with 5 to 10 milligrams of CBN is a good night. And I mean, in more ways than one, it's a great feeling. It feels like, a 800-pound gorilla lifted off your back, and then the sleep is absolutely excellent. So we work a lot with CBN, constantly looking at new ways to market it, potentiate it, and produce it in a way that will make it more bioavailable. So I have a really, really good concept for CBN that I'm workshopping before the end of the year, and it's going to be a game changer. So I'm quite excited to move the dial forward on that.
I can't wait to try it. I haven't tried it isolated by itself yet. How do you extract the different cannabinoids? How do you isolate one from another?
So it depends. It really depends on what you're looking to isolate from what. There's some cannabinoids will co-crystallize together, so traditional crystallization doesn't always work. There's other situations where certain materials require a different saturation level to crash out and isolate from the solution. But we do ethanol extraction, and the reason we do ethanol is because it's very scalable. It's easy to work with. A lot of people say it's messy and you carry a whole bunch of stuff over with it, and that's true, but we also know how to clean that up. So there's proper ways to filter out the chlorophyll. You can remove the fats, the waxes, the lipids, the sugars, and we wind up with a very clean amber CBD crude traditionally. And so the way that we go about it in terms of CBD and CBG, it's simply from sourcing from Massachusetts hemp farmers. Their certified crop, it's either going to be CBD dominant or CBG dominant traditionally. So with those, it's a very simple extraction. You can isolate it using chromatography. You could isolate it using hydrocarbons. We do a combination of both. And what should be known is that the process in order to synthesize cannabidiol CBD into cannabinol CBN is the same process applied with your starting material of CBG will produce CBC, cannabichromene. So that, for instance, is a singular method of conversion and synthesis. Now, separating the minors is essentially when you remove the CBD isolate from this crude oil, you're left with what we call a mother liquor. And that mother liquor has your THC, it has all your concentrated minors. And if you allow that to pile up quite a bit, you could have a plethora of minor cannabinoids suspended and sitting. So at that point, it's just a matter of remediating out the THC, and you create this high minor cannabinoid mother liquor that can be distilled and used just as any other cannabinoid blend formulation.
I've heard that Delta 8 is the latest craze. Could you explain what Delta 8 THC is and how it's extracted?
Yes. So Delta 8 THC. I'm trying to think of what to say here, because I have such a mixed opinion on it. So Delta 8 THC is an isomer of the THC molecule. It's a analog, just like there's Delta 8, there's Delta 9, which is the traditional THC that we all know. There's also Delta 10. There's also what's called Delta 11 hydroxy, which is what Delta 9 and Delta 8 both convert to in the liver. So Delta 8 THC has become the talk of the town because what it does is it allows. All right, so Delta 8 THC is naturally occurring in the plant in very, very, very tiny amounts. So traditionally, over the last decade or so, there hasn't been much talk about it. Now, the reason Delta 8 has found its way into normal discussion has been because of the hemp industry. So there is a process in which you can synthesize CBD into THC. Any isomer of THC really, but the end result is Delta 8. And just like prior, when I was talking about that total THC formula that the federal government and the states oblige by, Delta 8 THC is not in that mix. So there's a lot of folks on the hemp side that are using it to kind of circumvent THC law in some ways. Now, I'll say something that will sound controversial, but it's true. There is little to no compliant Delta 8 THC distillate on the market that is ready to be put inside of a cartridge and used on its own as a single molecule. We make Delta 8 THC here. I actually have the reaction running right now in the back. That is exactly what we're doing right now and will be for the next 24 hours. And what we use it is as a potentiation tool. So I have a cartridge, which if I was prepared, I would have had nearby. But I manufacture a cartridge that has about 8% Delta 8 THC in it. And that 8% allows us to push the cannabinoid blend beyond, its allotted amount with the 0.3% total THC, because THC is a great potentiator. That's why there's a huge difference between isolates, broad spectrum, and full spectrum, and that's why people look for the full spectrum. The THC works almost like a matchstick with the presence of other cannabinoids. It activates everything, and there's other cannabinoids that work in that way as well, which I'll eventually get into. But it's crucial for these full spectrum applications to have a presence of THC. Me personally, and many other advocates and folks working in the hemp industry, we're fighting for a 1% THC limit. That's actually what Switzerland has, and they do not have legal marijuana, but they do have legal hemp over the counter, and they allow up to 1% THC, and that's 1% Delta 9. We're looking for that, just that 1% total. But because of that limit, the inclusion of Delta 8 THC could be used as a great ingredient and potentiation tool. What I don't believe it should be is a standalone vapable product. The process in which Delta 8 THC is synthesized is not as friendly as CBN. And I don't want to say things that are going to raise alarms, because it's not a huge complex organic chemical process to do it right. It just really requires folks paying attention. So you essentially are taking your CBD, you're melting it into hydrocarbons, and you're adding an acid, a catalyzing acid, caustic acids, and it's then refluxed, which is the reaction is mixed, and there is a cold condenser pushing the solution back into the reactor, and you let that run. And what it does is it repositions those hydrogen atoms and will convert the CBD down a chain. So first the CBD will convert to a Delta 9 THC, and then you allow the reaction to keep running, and you wind up with a Delta 8 THC. That's the next in the isomerization chain. There is a absolutely necessary step at the end that requires base washing, neutralizing the solution, testing the pH, and making sure that it's ready for consumption. And I can personally attest that I've seen solutions out there just by pictures that show lingering acidity, reagents still present in the material, different coloration. So I always want to be sure that I'm never against a molecule. I'm never against any of it. I am against the wrong people approaching it, because we've seen in the past that when the legislature, whether it's federal or state, decides to take action, they usually kind of make it broad language that screws everybody and shuts everything down. My fear with Delta 8 THC synthesis and how it's being marketed and spread is I believe it could bring unnecessary federal or state legislature attention to hemp derivatives and synthesis. And there's so many other materials and cannabinoids that are made through light synthesis that do not get you high, that are non-psychoactive, and that are super beneficial to pushing this plant forward and returning it to the people. So I do get a lot of fear when I start seeing the way that it's being marketed and passed around on these marketplaces. I don't like that there is a huge disparity in the analytical labs in terms of how they test for Delta 8 THC. You'll see a lot of passing labs for Delta 8 THC distillate that there's just no way. We do a reaction regularly that usually winds up at 9% Delta 9 THC in that solution. And that's a really good reaction. Like we had to work hard to get to that, to sub 10%. The lowest amount of Delta 9 THC that I've ever heard in a Delta 8 distillate batch was 0.61%. And that 0.61%, let's just say you are sourcing a 0.61% Delta 9, you would still have to cut it by over 50% to put it inside of a cartridge. And there's no application where you should have 50% diluent inside of a cartridge. So I support Delta 8 as a molecule. I support it heavily being introduced into the marijuana space. One thing about Delta 8, the effects are different when inhaled. It has about 70% of the efficacy of Delta 9 THC. And many people report that there is little to no paranoia associated with it. It's very energetic, it's very daytime, and very clear-headed. There's not a lot of that muddiness that you'll deal with a heavy Delta 9 THC dose. So it absolutely has its place. And I'm so happy that the science has put us in a position where we can safely produce mass quantities of what are otherwise scarce or rare cannabinoids so that we could find out how they work on the body. I mean, Delta 8 THC is also an anticonvulsant. It's also an anti-inflammatory. It's also great topically. So it absolutely has its place. And I do believe that the hemp space should be able to operate and work with Delta-8 THC. But I always get fear that we're going to deal with some sort of harsh regulation or crash down because of folks just trying to follow the next big cannabinoid to make a quick buck. Usually I tell people if they ask me, especially retailers, hey, I got someone trying to sell me Delta-8, ask them about the rest of the plan. If you're just trekking around trying to deal with just the cannabinoids that get you high, and you're clearly trying to circumvent the process of getting a marijuana license, and you're looking to get people inebriated. I say allow people to make those decisions on their own. I also don't believe the hemp-derived products should provide a kind of a head change that leads a end user unable to drive. When someone sees that something is a hemp product, they are assuming it's a much more benign product and solution. They're not expecting to take a hit off of a Delta-8 hemp cartridge that's being marketed as hemp and THC compliant and then have to call an Uber because they don't feel comfortable getting behind the wheel. So those are the sort of things that I think really matter. I think because we aren't able to be very truthful in the marketing of these products, there's a lot left up to who knows. Buy it and find out how you respond. And I just think that we need some sort of guidelines on synthesis by the USDA or the CCC, or MDAR or something that's coordinating with the small hemp industries and the small hemp farmers and processors, because I have a lot of fear that hemp manufacturers are circumventing THC law and making THC. That's the headline, and it will sell. And while we are kind of moving into a less prohibitive and more, I don't want to use that word, a more progressive collective tone on cannabis legalization and proliferation, I believe that these sort of pitfalls can cause them to go, hey, maybe we should slow down a bit. And slowing down, in their words, is wait another decade. So I get that's kind of where I'm at. I'm very much an alarmist. I come from a high risk industry. I've worked in nicotine vaping products for the last 5 years and still currently do. So I've seen harsh regulation get passed down by regulating authorities, putting people in a position where they don't know if they're going to have to close their doors every day. So I see those sort of issues, and I just would not want to see anything disrupt the trajectory that we're on right now, where legislators are coming around and even the ones that were prohibitionists and anti are sitting here going, hey, even if I don't approve of this, it's not politically savvy for me to be against cannabis. And good, you should feel that way. Keep the pressure on them. You should not feel comfortable talking bad about marijuana in public office. So not giving them a reason and not giving them ammo is something that's important to me. So I don't make products that get people high. Not that I'm against it, not that I'm indifferent towards whether I do or don't want to. I like what I'm doing. I like our mission statement. It's personal. So I try to avoid all of the hype. But yeah, I think that kind of summed it up.
Yeah, you pretty much answered the legality question.
In terms of legality, there's actually so there was a lot of confusion on that. In August, the DEA put out an IFR, and it was basically a public notice clarifying their position on hemp and THC. And they had a very, very specific line in that DEA bulletin that said all synthetic tetrahydrocannabinols are a Schedule 1 narcotic, which I shiver even calling anything marijuana related a Schedule 1 narcotic. But that's the verbiage that they used, and that scared quite a few people, including myself. I was working very heavily with Delta-8. I was heavily invested into a product release, and I cut the cord. And the reason that it's still shaky is because that same bulletin also made hemp extraction basically illegal. They said that at any point if it goes above 0.3% THC, even works in progress, that is a Schedule 1 substance. There's no such thing as CBD crude oil that is below 0.3% THC. That just does not exist. I'm not going to say it doesn't exist, but it's really, 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 really uncommon. I've struggled to find a CBG distillate that's under 1% total THC, and this is from fully certified crop, everything compliant at the time of harvest. So when you're concentrating it, that concentration and that percentage increases. So it's really kind of who wants to be case law is the way I'll describe it, because on one hand, the DEA says this, but on the other hand, 2018, Congress passed the Agricultural Improvement Act, which legalizes specifically hemp derivatives. So it really kind of boils down to what is a derivative and who's going to define and clarify that. And then also understanding that Congress holds precedence over the DEA. The DEA doesn't have autonomous rulemaking like the FDA does. The FDA can come out and say, this is dangerous, and they don't need Congress to act. They can make something illegal right away. That is the law of the land. They have that autonomy. The DEA does not. So while they're clarifying that IFR, that bulletin, was simply stating this is how we see it, Congress is still the law of the land. So it's really just about who wants to battle it out. The things that we do and the things that we produce that include some Delta 8 in the mix, we're the least likely offenders when they decide to make an example out of somebody. I see some pretty crazy stuff out there. So the other thing with the legality aspect is, and this, depending on who's watching this, I hope no one who makes a Delta 8 product, you can't lab shop and call something legal. Nobody cares what your lab paperwork says when it comes to an audit by law enforcement. It's very easy. I can produce a product right now that's bursting with Delta 9 THC, send it to one of 3 labs I know offhand that are going to give me a passing grade, and then I can sell that product over state lines. But when a federal agent or state police get word that this product is, and they pluck it off the shelf, they're going to send it to their labs. And those results are what's going to dictate how it's dealt with. So there's a lot of folks that are using very specific labs to get passing grades just for the commission of their sale, but it's not a legal product. And I've said something about this publicly. People will jump on me about it, but it is what it is. I don't see it as competition. I just see it as a general issue, which is why I talked about the disparity among analytical labs. I mean, we use MCR traditionally in state, but I send all of my stuff out of state as well to KCA labs in Kentucky, because they're a DEA registered lab that has over 20 CRMs, cannabis standards for testing. And they provide chromatograms, and they back everything up, and they're extremely stringent. And I want that. I want strict labs. At the end of the day, we have to realize, and I could get in trouble for this, but the way we see everything that we do is the end result is it's intended for a patient. And that's the way that you have to see it. That isolate that we're producing, no, that's not just going to a dispensary or to a manufacturer. That's winding up in the mouth of a patient. And that's how we keep that mentality, because the end result is that it's not about getting the sale. It's about being transparent and accurately and honestly conveying to your potential consumer what is in it. So if there is Delta 9 THC in large amounts, I've seen Delta 8 vape cartridges. I bought a whole bunch of them off the internet and sent them out for testing, just to test to see if I was wrong or I was going to eat my words. And I've seen stuff as high as 4% Delta 9 THC inside of a cartridge being sold as not. And that is a disservice to your end user. People have a right to know what is inside that product. I have a philosophy here that you should be able to point to anything that we produce, any end product, and I should be able to put that on a chromatograph, pull up all those peaks and tell you why every single constituent is in there and for what reason. If you cannot explain your product like that and you're not willing to give that information to the end user, you have no business making products for people that are looking to ingest stuff medicinally. Understanding who your target audience and customer base is super important. So for us, instead of saying, oh, well, what about this crowd, that crowd, it's just in general patients. You know, marketing of the product, sure, that's a whole other thing. But who are we targeting? People that need this. That's what it's about. So it's any avenue to get into their hands, you know, legitimately, but testing is extremely important. And I would love to see a national standard on cannabis testing. You know, I could go on and on about this. You know, I've seen analytical reports where you take a look at it and there's just no way. For instance, you'll see a lot of people will get Delta 8 tested, and it will show that there's a percentage of CBC in there, cannabichromene. And the second I see that, I know that this is a lab I can't use because there's definitely no cannabichromene in the mix. It's Delta 10 THC, which is a common side reaction when producing Delta 8. But the peak is so similar to CBC that a lot of the labs just say, okay, that's CBC, which really shows you that there's quite a bit of guesswork at a lot of the testing labs. I'm not talking about any in particular. I've used them all over the country, everywhere, just doing my own R&D and research. But there could be a lot of confusion between the labs in terms of what you're actually getting. And I think that's an issue that needs to be resolved. I think Lorna cut out again. Okay.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, Lorna's back.
Am I back?
Yes. Okay.
What do you think the next big cannabinoid is before I cut out again?
So I love answering this question just because I don't believe there is a next big cannabinoid. I think the future is the realization and the understanding that many times cannabinoids, single cannabinoids, are not the feature and not the product, but an ingredient. I personally do not use THC distillate on its own. I use THC distillate in combination with a full spectrum CBD distillate and a little bit of CBN and a little bit of CBC. So I think the future is therapeutic cannabinoid blends. I think it's more so along the lines of realizing that when we process these plants, you know, you're messing with nature, you're messing with God. The plant grows the way that it does, it produces what it produces, and when we take that through through any sort of processing, whether it's hydrocarbon, butane, propane, CO2, whatever, we don't know what's being left behind yet. And this kind of ties back into what I was talking about with the analytical labs. I just named a lab that it's super impressive that they have 18 cannabinoid, what's the term? Oh my God. I can't believe I'm blanking out. Standards. They have 18 cannabinoid standards. But the reality is that there's over 115 known cannabinoids. So we still have no idea what is being stripped out through the processing process. You know, you don't know what's left behind. We don't know what's being carried over. We don't know how to test for these small residual amounts. And that's kind of why we need to realize that when you're producing these products, you've already messed with nature. So about fine-tuning exactly how much of each cannabinoid and what kind of blend and how to create a final solution for a desired effect using what we have available. So I produce a product called the Trifecta Relax. And the ingredients inside of it is it's about 8% delta 8 THC. It's about 7% CBN, 7% CBC, about 25% CBG, and 45% CBD. I don't know if I said one of those multiple times, but there's 5 total cannabinoids. And this was from just simply mixing and matching and doing research on the various potential of them. For example, I made an announcement the other day that we're kind of reformulating it, because taking that same solution, we've been able to replace the CBC, the cannabichromene, with cannabicitran, CBT, which is produced from CBDA, which is the CBD molecule, the acidic CBD molecule, still has the carboxylic acid. But hold on, where was I? I was just saying something. CBT. So when we start producing this CBT, I started taking a look at the viscosity of it, and it's moving almost like water. And the test results are coming back as a 99, 98% pure molecule. And it's a bright, light amber, and it has no smell or taste. So here we now have this great potentiator that can naturally lighten up the color of the cartridge. People love to see that perfect amber glow. Anything too dark, it looks like it was oxidized or starting to go bad. And it allows it to lighten that color while also potentiating the rest of the solution. So we're now chopping down in half the delta 8 THC, increasing CBT and inserting that into the mix, and you're getting the exact same effect. So now the ability to get that entourage effect with other minor and rare sourced hemp-derived cannabinoids gives great ability to potentiate beyond the effects. So, like, for instance, if let's say you wanted a CBD tincture, I would never put just plain CBD inside of a bottle. Now, a lot of people will do it with a full spectrum distillate, so there's an inclusion of a light amount of THC. But if somebody had said to me like, hey man, do you have any CBD for sleep? I'm going to put that mix together as something like 70% CBD, maybe 5% CBN, and then a whole bunch of cannabichromene and CBT, because those cannabinoids work with that entourage effect to potentiate the effects of the CBD. So I believe that's where we need to wind up. There was a lot of CBD isolate products that were sold during 2018. And I just remember looking at that and shaking my head as people are paying hundreds of dollars for isolate in a bottle. Now, granted, isolate did have a higher cost at the time, but it never warranted that, nor do those products have the effects that people were looking for. So I think that, you know, yes, there's a couple stars of the show. You know, hemp and marijuana are both cannabis. I use the word hemp only when talking to regulators or with people who aren't in the know. I work with cannabis. There's high CBG cannabis, there's high CBD cannabis, and there's high THC cannabis. And each one of those have their different names in accordance with the law and how the regulating authority wants to see it. But I truly believe that going forward, we're going to see a huge amount of people starting to blend these cannabinoids together. I've never made a standalone CBG product, but I include a little bit of CBG in everything I do that's CBD. I always believe more the merrier, but there has to be some sort of science behind it. It's not just a throw them all in a pot, see what it does and label it. You know, there's like, for instance, the amount of CBD that's in my cartridge is used not only to balance the entourage effect, but the amount of CBD is in a 4-to-1 proportion to the delta 8 THC to subdue any of the psychoactivity that someone might feel from that delta 8, which goes back to what I was saying earlier. I don't want to make a product that gets people high. I want to make products that get people well. You know what I mean? And allow people to make those decisions on their own. So what that does is it allows the THC to do what we want it to do and push the whole blend and give that full spectrum feel, but it doesn't allow it to do the psychoactivity part because of that 4-to-1 CBD ratio bogging it down. So I think the future is not a single cannabinoid as we have been doing. I think the future is therapeutic cannabinoid blends, which is the term that I use for what we produce.
Does CBD bring you down, so to speak?
Yes.
From your high?
Yes, absolutely. That was how I was introduced to CBD, was to counter the psychoactivity of THC. It gave me a full balance. In fact, I'm working on a product right now that is intended to, I'm too high, take a shot of nano-emulsified CBD with a certain oil blend, and it'll definitely roll back that edible a little bit. Not entirely. You're still not good to drive, but you'll probably go to bed.
After edibles, definitely. That's the only time I have any problem.
Yeah, it's a commitment.
You recently worked alongside other advocates on a budget amendment that passed. Can you explain a little more about that?
Absolutely. So I worked with the Massachusetts Hemp Coalition. We helped. It was Hillary King who had written the bill. She had written an amendment that wound up getting filed as the Massachusetts Hemp Industry Survive and Thrive Act. And what the amendment did was it amends chapter 94G, section 12F of which is our marijuana and cannabis law. It modifies that to allow CCC licensees, so marijuana processors and dispensaries, to bring in hemp products that are certified under the Department of Agriculture in Massachusetts and sourced from Massachusetts grown hemp. So this was passed not only just to open up and allow these other non-psychoactive cannabinoids and products to make their way into medical and recreational dispensaries, but this also protects the supply chain here, where I don't have a business without farmers. Okay. And in order for these farmers to keep growing, they need to get paid. That's what they want, is money. Good tidings, all of that goes well, and we could kumbaya all day and feel good about the plant we're growing. But if they're not making money, they're not going to keep growing. And that's kind of what we're dealing with. There's been a lot of farms dealing with having to burn their crop, having to torch their fields over these nominal THC amounts, and then the ones that pass not having an avenue or a market to sell their product. So this amendment, personally, for my company, means that we're now able to provide CBD isolate, CBN isolate, CBG isolate, and all of these cannabinoids that I mentioned, aside from the Delta-8 THC, of course. We're able to provide those to marijuana processors so that they could start to incorporate them in. This also allows, like, for instance, any finished products that are legal to be sold as per MDR and the Massachusetts Health Department. This allows them to sell those products into dispensaries as well. March 11th was 90 days since the budget was signed. We are still waiting on the CCC to provide some sort of guidance to the dispensaries. It was supposed to be enacted by now. And it's kind of ridiculous that it's taking this long. You got people like Laura Biener from the Healing Rose, who's making topical skincare CBD products that can be sold pretty much anywhere in this state except for a cannabis dispensary. And this is ridiculous. You know what I mean? It never should have been that way. And one of the things that was pointed out as well with this is that other states that have legalized marijuana post 2018 have already made sure this gap doesn't exist. So like Illinois and Michigan, they allow their hemp processors and producers to supply products into the marijuana supply chain. What this will do is this creates a very, very sustainable industry for mass hemp farmers, processors, and manufacturers. And I remember, I was asked, because we're allowed to sell our products everywhere but a dispensary. So I could put CBN products right now in 7-Eleven legally. I could put a CBN product in a smoke shop, in a head shop, in a vape shop, anywhere you can imagine. It is legal for me to put those products there. But that's not where a patient should have to go. A patient, for example, myself, I have a history where, When I first got my medical marijuana card, I did everything by the book. Everything by the book. So it was, I took my card, I went to a medical dispensary, and I said, here are my issues and here's what I'm looking for help with. And my options were THC or THC with CBD. And I shouldn't have to go to the smoke shop to find these molecules. They should be available elsewhere. And this is not a fault on the THC marijuana industry for not providing it, because over the last year, 2 years, I've learned what the mechanics going into it would be for them. And it is not cost effective for them to introduce these molecules. It just isn't. You're essentially asking them, we're already bottlenecked because the state did not approve enough cultivators in the beginning. So we're already bottlenecked. So the price of goods is still extraordinarily high. So if I were to tell, a marijuana processor, hey, that $25,000 kilogram of THC, I want you to degrade that into a cannabinoid that not many people are very much into, but and then launch a marketing campaign. They're going to go, what are you talking about? I could instantly, this is what people want. They're lining up for cartridges. So why would they want to experiment when the cost of goods is so high? So this allows us on the hemp side to produce these products at a much lesser cost, provide it to the marijuana processor, and then here's the kicker, it's tax deductible. So now your CBN that you produce from THC, you can't deduct that THC. But if you purchase CBN, which is with test results showing 99% pure, 0% THC, that is now a federally legal hemp ingredient product. So it also adds a huge amount of value to the marijuana processor dispensary that does decide to diverge into these sort of creams.
Why do you think some people objected to the bill passing?
Vested interests. We had one bit of opposition. I can't name exactly who it was because it's not public record for some reason, but there was an objection submitted by someone who is now pursuing a THC license. And they had accused Hillary, myself, and everyone pushing this as being anti-THC, which couldn't be any further from the truth. I mean, it's nobody here is against THC, but the point is that we want a cannabis industry, not a hemp industry and a marijuana industry, but a cannabis industry where every part of this supply chain serves the overall goal and mission of putting these products in the hands of the people and the patients who need it. It's the proliferation of these molecules and the momentous task of returning this plant to the people in all of its forms. So I believe that this bill, once passed, actually is a net benefit for everyone involved. It allows the dispensaries to get tax deductible ingredients. They can, instead of making their own CBD creams, they could reach out to Healing Rose or another topical manufacturer. I don't want to sound too impartial, but I love Laura and her company. But it's just a matter of being able to open up the gap so that people can walk inside and they have an array of different cannabinoids, and also to combine this with a big time education campaign. I believe that not only do we need to put these products out there, but that's why I reached out to Beth Waterfall over at Elevate Northeast, and we've started discussing about figuring out a way to do an education campaign so that these bud tenders and so that these dispensary workers are able to direct and guide patients to the formulations best suited for what they're looking for. I think that's the future, and I think it's 100% within reach, and I think it's going to create a unity. Now the CEO of a large chain of cannabis dispensaries has a vested interest in small hemp farmers being able to grow their crop every year because that's their CBD source. Lauren's
I
back.
wanted to ask you, I'm back, but before we go, where can people get in touch with you?
You could get in touch with me through our website, baystatehemp.com. My email address is john, John, at baystatehemp.com. You could find us on Google. You could give me a call, schedule an appointment. I'm happy to work with anybody. We provide lots of services for farmers, super equitable tolling, 75% goes back to the farmer, not 50%. Yeah, baystatehemp.com.
Thank you, John. Thank you for tuning in to the MassCann's Virtual Education Village, produced and broadcast thanks to the all-volunteer effort of the MassCann organization. MassCann is a registered 501c4 nonprofit dedicated to educating lawmakers, regulators, and the general public about the harms caused by a decades-long racist drug war. To find out more and become a member, please visit masscann.org and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/masscann and on Instagram at masscann.org. Goodbye and have a good day, everyone.